The world of ancient Greece is often remembered for its grand temples, epic stories, and the philosophers who shaped the way we think. But behind the marble columns and myths of gods, there was another story, the quiet, daily rhythm of how people lived, how they cared for their bodies, and what hygiene meant in a world without soap as we know it, without modern plumbing, and without the comforts of hot running water in Greek cities. Public baths were more than places to wash. They were social hubs where men gathered to talk, share news, and relax after exercise. Olive oil was rubbed on the skin, then scraped away with a slender tool called a strigil, carrying dust and sweat with it. Perfumed oils masked odors, while sea water, fresh springs, and simple rinsing played their part in cleansing. For many, hygiene was not only about cleanliness but about health, beauty, and the harmony between body and soul. Tonight, we step back into that world, into stone courtyards where basins of water reflected the sun, into gymnasiums where athletes oiled their bodies, and into homes where clay jars held fragrant oils. We will discover how ancient Greeks lived with the resources they had, what they believed about health and the body, and how their habits shaped ideas that echo even today. So settle in. Let the quiet rhythm of history surround you. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these calming stories alive. In the world of ancient Greece, where sunlight poured down on marble courtyards and the scent of olive groves drifted across the hills, hygiene was not simply a matter of cleanliness. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. To the Greeks, caring for the body was a habit, a necessity, and in many cases, an art form. Yet their approach was very different from ours. There were no bars of soap lined up on tiled shelves, no steaming showers with knobs to adjust the temperature. Instead, bathing rituals, oils, scrapers, and the rhythms of nature shaped how people stayed clean. To walk through the bathing culture of Greece is to walk through a society that prized balance, health, and the subtle harmony between body and environment. Bathing began with simplicity. In the earliest days, before elaborate public facilities were built, people bathed in rivers, springs, or the sea. Water was abundant in some areas and scarce in others, so bathing customs depended heavily on geography. In coastal towns, seawater was both a resource and a cleanser, and many believed that salt water refreshed and invigorated the body. In inland regions, freshwater streams or wells supplied what was needed for washing, though fetching water often required effort. Large clay basins were kept in homes, where family members could pour water over themselves from jugs, letting it run down their bodies before drying with linen cloths. These early practices laid the foundation for what would later become a much more sophisticated bathing culture. Over time, bathing in Greece developed into a ritual that combined physical cleansing with social interaction. Public baths began to appear in larger cities, offering spaces where men, especially, could gather. These were not yet as elaborate as the massive bathhouses that would later define Roman life, but they carried their own importance. A typical Greek bath included a simple room with basins or small pools, sometimes fed by natural springs. Hot water was not always available, but clever engineering allowed heated baths in certain locations. These spaces were more than utilitarian. They were part of a rhythm of relaxation after exercise, particularly in connection with the gymnasium. The gymnasium was central to Greek society, a place not only for exercise but also for education, conversation, and grooming. After wrestling, running, or practicing athletic drills, men would retire to the bathing area. There, they coated their bodies with olive oil, which served multiple purposes. The oil protected the skin from the sun, softened it after exertion, and trapped dust and sweat. Once the oil had done its work, it was scraped away using a slender, curved tool called a strigil. The strigil was often made of bronze, sometimes iron, shaped to glide over the body and remove the mixture of oil, dirt, and sweat that clung to the skin. The scraping left the body refreshed, smooth, and clean in a way that simple rinsing with water could not achieve. The act of oiling and scraping became almost ceremonial in its repetition. Athletes, after training, lined up to rub olive oil into their arms, chests, and legs, working it into the skin. Then, holding the strigil at an angle, they scraped downward, collecting the residue that built up during exercise. The result was a shining, polished body that reflected the Greek admiration for physical form. Strigils themselves were personal items, carried in small pouches or hung from belts, sometimes inscribed with names or decorated with fine craftsmanship. They were as much a mark of personal grooming as a comb or brush is today. Bathing was not limited to athletes. However, in homes, olive oil was also used for cleansing, massaged into the skin, and then wiped away with cloths or scraped off. Women, too, engaged in these practices, though their routines were more private, carried out within the home or in small baths set aside for them. Perfumed oils, stored in elegant ceramic containers called alabastrons, added fragrance and luxury to the process. These oils were blended with herbs, flowers, and spices, filling rooms with scents of lavender, rose, or cinnamon. For many, the act of applying oil was as important as washing itself, turning daily hygiene into a sensory experience. Hair care was another part of Greek hygiene closely tied to bathing rituals. After cleansing the body, attention turned to the head. Hair was washed with water and occasionally treated with oils to keep it soft and manageable. Combs of bone or wood were used to remove tangles and distribute oil evenly. Men often wore their hair short, while women's hairstyles varied from simple braids to elaborate arrangements. Cleanliness of the hair was a visible sign of grooming, and oils added both shine and fragrance. Beards, too, required care. Men trimmed them with shears and applied oil to keep them neat. In this way, bathing extended beyond the body to encompass the entire appearance. The Greek approach to hygiene was practical yet philosophical. They did not separate the body into categories of dirt and purity in the way modern societies sometimes do. Instead, they saw the body as something to be cared for, maintained, and balanced. Sweat, dust, and oil were natural results of living and exercising, and cleansing was simply a way of resetting that balance. The process of bathing, oiling, and scraping was not only physical, but also calming, a way to restore harmony at the end of exertion. This outlook helps explain why bathing was tied so closely to exercise, conversation, and even relaxation. In larger cities, communal baths also played a role in social life. Friends met in these spaces, discussed news, and shared moments of ease after the strain of the day. Though modest compared to Roman baths, Greek facilities still carried the atmosphere of gathering and connection. Hot and cold water baths, sometimes arranged in sequence, offered contrast and refreshment. Stone benches lined the walls, and mosaics decorated the floors in wealthier establishments. The sound of water pouring into basins, the scrape of strigils, and the murmur of conversation filled the air. Hygiene was never just about the body. It was about belonging to a community. For the poor, hygiene was simpler, often limited to rinsing with water at wells, streams, or in communal basins set in neighborhoods. Olive oil, though widespread, could be expensive, so not every family used it regularly for cleansing. Instead, they relied on water, cloths, and occasionally sand or ash to scrub away dirt. These methods were less luxurious but still effective, showing the adaptability of Greek practices to different circumstances. What mattered was the act of cleansing, however modest, for it restored freshness in a world where heat, dust, and labor were constant companions. Archaeological evidence tells us much about these routines. Excavations have uncovered strigils of bronze, sometimes buried with their owners as treasured possessions. Oil flasks, jars, and alabastrons appear frequently in graves and households, their residues revealing traces of herbs and perfumes. Public bath remains show basins and drainage systems, testifying to the scale of facilities in certain cities. Together, these artifacts paint a vivid picture of hygiene as a tangible, everyday reality in ancient Greece. The rituals of bathing and scraping also influenced how Greeks thought about health. Exercise, cleansing, and diet formed a triad of care that defined well-being. The gymnasium embodied this integration, where physical training was followed by bathing, conversation, and often a meal. Health was not seen as the absence of illness, but as the balance of body and habits, maintained through daily practices. In this sense, hygiene was part of a larger philosophy of living, not just a reaction to dirt, but a proactive pursuit of harmony that by the time the Roman world rose to dominance. The Greeks had already established traditions of bathing and hygiene that would be absorbed, adapted, and expanded into the grand bathhouses of the empire. The strigil, the oil flask, the small communal baths, all became part of a cultural inheritance that stretched far beyond Greece's borders. Yet the Greek way retained its distinct flavor, modest, practical, and focused on the balance of body and community. To picture a Greek bathing ritual is to picture sunlight filtering into a courtyard, a man or woman dipping a jug into cool water, the glint of a bronze strigil scraping down an arm, and the scent of olive oil filling the air. It is a quiet, rhythmic scene, repeated day after day, year after year, across the cities and villages of Greece. Simple yet profound, it reminds us that even in ancient times, people sought freshness, comfort, and care in the routines of hygiene. In the warm air of ancient Greece, where the sea breeze carried salt across coastal towns and the dust of roads clung to skin and clothing, grooming was as essential as bathing. Cleanliness did not stop at scraping away sweat and dust with the strigil. It extended into the rituals of perfumed oils, the careful tending of hair, and the subtle art of presenting oneself in public. Grooming was never purely about vanity. It was about health, freshness, and the quiet discipline of self-care. To walk through the world of ancient Greek grooming is to enter a landscape filled with fragrance, texture, and daily rhythms that shaped how people felt in their bodies and how they appeared to others. Perfumed oils were at the heart of these routines. Olive oil, so abundant in the Mediterranean, served as the base for nearly every cleansing and grooming practice. It was more than food. It was the universal substance of Greek life, pressed from the fruit of trees that stood across the hills and valleys. Mixed with herbs, flowers, and spices, olive oil became something more, a fragrant elixir that nourished the skin, softened the hair, and masked the odors of labor and heat. People stored these oils in vessels that were as beautiful as the liquids they contained, slim alabastrons, decorated with painted figures, small arabaloi, globular flasks carried on strings, and larger amphorae for bulk storage. Each container testified not only to the utility of oil, but to the pride Greeks took in surrounding themselves with objects of beauty. The scents themselves were varied and carefully chosen. Rose oil, pressed from petals, carried a sweet and gentle fragrance. Lavender brought calm freshness, while sage, thyme, and rosemary offered sharper, more invigorating notes. Exotic ingredients entered Greece through trade. Cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense traveled from distant lands, adding richness to local recipes. These perfumes were not worn in overwhelming amounts. Instead, they were subtle, rubbed into the skin after bathing, dabbed onto hair, or applied to clothes to carry a gentle aroma. In a society that valued moderation, the art of fragrance was one of balance, enough to refresh, never so much as to overwhelm. Applying oil was a daily practice that carried both practical and aesthetic value. After exercise or work, oil was rubbed into the skin to restore suppleness. The body, often exposed to sun, wind, and dust, needed care to remain healthy. Oil protected against dryness, eased minor irritations, and gave the skin a slight sheen that Greeks associated with vitality. The act itself could be soothing, like a massage, easing tension from muscles while nourishing the body. It was not uncommon for oils to be applied by others, attendants in wealthy households, companions in the gymnasium, or family members at home, turning grooming into a social or intimate act as well as a personal one. Hair care, 2. Occupied an important place in Greek routines. Both men and women considered hair a reflection of health and personality, something to be maintained with attention. Combs of bone, ivory, or wood were used to untangle strands, distribute oil, and shape styles. Men often wore their hair short in practical fashion, particularly in military or athletic contexts, though in earlier periods longer hair was common and associated with status. Women's hair, by contrast, offered more variation. It could be worn loose at home, braided into simple plaits, or arranged in elaborate styles with ribbons, pins, and bands. Cleanliness of hair was emphasized. Rinsing with water and applying oil kept it soft and manageable, while fragrant additions ensured it carried a pleasant scent. Beards and facial hair reflected another layer of grooming. Beards were associated with maturity and dignity, and most men maintained them carefully. They trimmed regularly with shears or razors, keeping lines neat, and softened coarse hair with oil. The act of grooming a beard was more than maintenance. It carried symbolic meaning, signaling adulthood, wisdom, or social identity. At times, fashion shifted toward clean-shaven faces, particularly under the influence of leaders who favored the look. Whatever the style, attention to grooming the face was an expectation, not an option. For those who wished to appear respectable in society, grooming extended beyond skin and hair to include nails, teeth, and overall presentation. Nails were clipped and cleaned with small tools, their care seen as part of general neatness. Teeth were rubbed with cloths, rinsed with water, or cleaned using mixtures of ash and herbs. Though their methods lacked modern precision, Greeks understood the value of maintaining a fresh mouth and healthy appearance. Clothing, too, was part of the grooming process. Freshly laundered linen, scented lightly with oil or herbs, complemented the work of bathing and grooming, completing the impression of a well-kept individual. The importance of grooming was felt across social classes, though practices varied with wealth. The rich had access to finer oils, rarer perfumes, and skilled attendants who assisted in daily rituals. They might own multiple alabastrons, each filled with a different scent, displayed on shelves in their homes. The poor, while lacking such luxuries, still valued cleanliness and grooming, making use of simpler oils, combs, and cloths. Water, ash, and modest amounts of oil served their needs, ensuring that even those with limited resources could maintain basic standards of care. The differences lay in refinement, not in the underlying importance of the routines. Social spaces reinforced these habits. In gymnasiums and baths, grooming became a collective activity. Men gathered not only to exercise but to cleanse and prepare themselves afterward, oiling their skin and combing their hair in shared spaces. Conversations flowed as hands smoothed oil over arms, as strigils scraped away dust, as fragrances filled the air. Grooming was never only about the individual. It was about community, appearance, and the shared acknowledgement that how one cared for the body reflected not only on oneself, but on the society as a whole. The artistry of grooming is visible in the artifacts that survive. Pottery paintings depict figures holding alabastrons, applying oil, or tending to their hair. Sculptures show hairstyles with intricate detail, preserving the fashions of the day in marble and bronze. Actual grooming tools, combs, razors, strigils, lie in museums, their worn edges telling of daily use. These objects speak of continuity, The repetition of countless mornings and evenings in which Greeks cared for themselves with diligence. The philosophy behind grooming was one of moderation and harmony. It was not about excess or ostentation, but about maintaining balance. Just as the Greeks valued proportion in art and architecture, they valued it in personal care. A well-groomed individual was not overly adorned, but neatly maintained, showing discipline and respect for both self and others. Grooming was an act of self-respect and a signal of social belonging. Neglecting it suggested disorder, while practicing it consistently aligned with ideals of order and beauty. Even in death, grooming carried meaning. Oils were applied to bodies prepared for burial, hair arranged, and nails cleaned. These practices underscored how deeply embedded grooming was in the cycle of life, a daily ritual that extended into memory and tradition. Cleanliness and fragrance were gifts given to both the living and the departed, signs of care that transcended necessity. When we imagine ancient Greece, we often picture white marble and dramatic stories. Yet the reality was lived in smaller, quieter moments. The touch of oil on skin, the glide of a comb through hair, the scent of herbs in the air. Grooming tied people to their bodies, to one another, and to their surroundings. It was an art of living, repeated endlessly, shaping how Greeks experienced themselves in the world. In the cities of ancient Greece, the streets were lined with stone houses, narrow alleys, and open squares where trade and conversation flowed. Yet tucked among these bustling scenes were places that offered more than refreshment. They offered cleanliness, rest, and connection. Public baths, though smaller and simpler than the vast complexes of Rome, were deeply woven into Greek life. They were not just about rinsing the body, but about creating community, maintaining health, and affirming a culture that valued both physical care and social interaction. To enter one of these baths was to enter a space where water, architecture, and conversation came together in a rhythm that shaped the daily experience of cleanliness. The earliest Greek baths were modest structures, often located near gymnasiums or athletic fields. Their purpose was practical. Athletes who wrestled in sand, ran on dusty tracks, or lifted heavy weights needed to cleanse themselves afterward. The connection between exercise and bathing was fundamental. Greeks believed that the body should not only be trained, but also maintained, that sweat and dust should be balanced by water and oil. A typical facility included shallow basins of cold water, sometimes fed by springs or aqueducts. Later, more elaborate designs included hot rooms with heated water, demonstrating how quickly the culture of bathing developed in sophistication. Inside, the atmosphere was shaped by sound and movement. The splash of water echoed against stone walls, strigils scraped along skin, and voices carried in low conversation. Bathers poured jugs of water over themselves, stood in pools to rinse, or sat on benches while attendants rubbed them with oil. Unlike the solitary bathing of private homes, these spaces created an environment of shared routine. Men cleansed together, talking about politics, philosophy, or local news, their conversations as much a part of the ritual as the washing itself. The public bath was thus a place where body and mind were refreshed at once. Cleanliness in these baths was not achieved through soap, but through oil and water. After exercising in the gymnasium, men coated their bodies with olive oil, often scented with herbs or flowers. In the bath, they used the strigil to scrape it away, along with dust and sweat. Water rinsed off the rest, leaving the skin refreshed. The combination of oiling, scraping, and rinsing gave the Greeks a distinctive method of cleansing that, though unfamiliar to us, was highly effective in their environment. The smell of perfumed oils lingered in the air, mingling with the cool freshness of water, creating an atmosphere that was both practical and sensory. The design of these spaces reflected their cultural importance. Floors were paved with stone, sometimes decorated with simple mosaics. Walls were lined with benches for resting, and pools were arranged for ease of access. In some places, heating systems allowed warm baths, though such features were not as widespread as they later became under Roman influence. The simplicity of Greek baths suited their purpose. They were functional, accessible, and designed to encourage regular use. Archaeological remains of such baths, found in cities like Athens, Corinth, and Olympia, reveal their modest scale but enduring role in daily life. For many Greeks, the public bath was more than hygiene. It was a form of civic life. To bathe was to join one's peers, to take part in a shared activity that reinforced belonging. Just as the marketplace was a center for trade, the gymnasium for exercise, and the theater for stories, the bath was a center for refreshment and ease. It was where neighbors met, where acquaintances deepened into friendships, and where the bonds of community were strengthened through ordinary routines. Not everyone had equal access to these facilities. In many places, public baths were primarily used by men, especially athletes and citizens of higher status. Women's bathing was often confined to the home, where basins, jugs, and small baths served family needs. In larger cities, however, there is evidence of separate spaces or times designated for women, suggesting that they too experienced the benefits of communal bathing, though within stricter boundaries. Children, depending on family status, might accompany parents, learning the rituals of grooming and cleansing from an early age. The role of attendants added another dimension to the culture of bathing. Wealthier men often brought slaves or hired assistants who carried oil flasks, strigils, and towels. These attendants applied oils, massaged muscles after exercise, and helped with scraping. In some cases, professional bath attendants worked within the facilities, offering their services for a fee. Their presence created a layered social structure within the bath, where class distinctions were evident even in the act of cleansing. Yet despite these differences, the shared environment blurred lines, placing citizens together in the same water, the same space, performing the same routines. Beyond the physical, bathing carried a symbolic weight. Cleanliness was associated with freshness, vitality, and readiness for participation in civic life. A man who exercised and bathed regularly appeared not only healthier, but also more disciplined, more in harmony with the ideals of balance and order. Neglecting such routines suggested disorder, weakness, or disregard for the values of the community. In this way, hygiene extended beyond the private sphere. It was part of how society judged individuals, part of the unspoken expectations of belonging. Travelers noted the presence of baths in Greek cities as signs of refinement. Visiting dignitaries and merchants used these spaces, finding not only refreshment but also opportunities for networking and exchange. The bath became a neutral ground, where conversation could flow more freely than in formal settings. Deals were struck, friendships cemented, and ideas exchanged over basins of water and the scraping of strigils. The social role of baths was thus inseparable from their hygienic function, creating a rhythm of daily life that tied personal care to civic connection. For the poor, public baths were often the only places where they could cleanse properly. Homes lacked facilities, and water was a resource that required effort to fetch and store. The availability of communal spaces allowed even those of modest means to experience regular bathing. Though their oils might be simpler, their access to water more limited, the opportunity to share in the same rituals as wealthier citizens reinforced a sense of inclusion. Baths, though stratified by status, still offered a measure of equality through the shared act of cleansing. Artifacts from these spaces provide glimpses into their atmosphere. Strigils and oil flasks have been found in the remains of bath complexes, worn smooth from repeated use. Drainage systems reveal how water was managed, channeled away from pools to keep spaces clean. Inscriptions and graffiti hint at the conversations that took place, the presence of individuals who once gathered there. Together, these traces tell us that bathing was not a luxury, but a living part of Greek society, as constant as markets or temples, woven into the rhythm of daily existence. The culture of cleanliness extended beyond the walls of the baths. Streets and homes reflected the same values, with families washing at fountains or using water jars for small-scale bathing. Grooming rituals, though private, echoed the same attention to balance and freshness. In this way, the public bath was part of a larger culture, one that saw hygiene not as an isolated act, but as an essential element of life itself. To picture a Greek bathhouse is to imagine a stone building warmed by sunlight, voices echoing in low tones, water splashing into basins, and the steady sound of strigils scraping over skin. The air is scented with oil and faintly salty from sweat washed away. Men sit on benches, talking of city affairs, while attendants move among them with flasks and cloths. The atmosphere is both practical and social, quiet yet alive with interaction. It is a scene of continuity, repeated across cities and centuries, shaping how Greeks thought of themselves and their communities. The legacy of these baths carried forward, influencing the grand designs of Roman bathing culture and, through them, the practices of later civilizations. Yet the Greek approach remained distinct, smaller, simpler, tied closely to exercise and grooming, less about spectacle and more about balance. It reflected the Greek view that cleanliness was part of a well-ordered life, one of many habits that sustained health, community, and the harmony of daily living. In the end, the public baths of ancient Greece remind us that hygiene was never only about removing dirt. It was about shaping identity, sustaining health, and nurturing bonds between people. It was about creating a rhythm where the body was cared for and the spirit refreshed, where private needs met public life, and where the culture of cleanliness became one of the quiet foundations of Greek civilization. When we think of ancient Greece, we often imagine its bustling cities, the shining marble of Athens, or the lively debates of philosophers. Yet most Greeks did not live in monumental cities. They lived in villages, small towns, and scattered farmsteads where life followed the rhythm of the land. In these places, hygiene was not about public baths or luxurious oils, but about everyday routines of water, cleanliness, and modest grooming. To step into a Greek village is to step into a quieter world, where hygiene was shaped by the availability of water, the design of homes, and the customs that tied families together. Water was the most important element, and its presence or absence defined hygiene in these communities. Villages were often built near springs, wells, or streams, for water was life, for drinking, cooking, washing, and bathing. Each home kept clay jars, sometimes large amphorae, filled with water brought from a fountain house or well. Fetching water was a daily task, often done by women and children, who carried heavy jars balanced on shoulders or heads. The sound of water being poured into vessels was part of the daily rhythm, a reminder that cleanliness depended on constant effort. In towns with communal fountains, people gathered not only to fill jars, but also to exchange news, creating small social rituals around water. Bathing in villages was simple and practical. Few homes had elaborate facilities, but most had basins or large tubs where water could be poured for washing. A bather might stand in a clay tub while another family member poured water over them with a jug, the cool liquid flowing down the body before being caught in shallow drains or splashed onto packed earth floors. Warm baths required heating water in bronze or clay pots over a fire, then carrying it into the bathing area. In summer, washing could take place outdoors, in courtyards where the sun offered both light and warmth. In winter, families relied on hearths to heat rooms before bathing, making the experience more comfortable but never luxurious. Olive oil, though precious, was still widely used even in villages. Families pressed oil from local groves, and while most of it was reserved for food or lamps, a portion was set aside for grooming. After a day in fields or workshops, villagers rubbed oil onto skin, both to soothe dryness and to lift dirt. They used cloths to wipe it off or, when available, strigils to scrape it away. These strigils were not always finely crafted. Some were plain iron or bronze, simple tools for daily life rather than ornament. The act of oiling and scraping was as much about refreshment as it was about appearance. It left the skin supple, reduced the wear of sun and wind, and provided a small luxury in otherwise modest routines. Hair care was a visible part of hygiene, even in rural areas. Combs carved from wood or bone were common, passed down through households or carried in small pouches. Women tended to wear their hair longer, braiding it or tying it back for work, while men kept theirs shorter, often trimming it themselves or with the help of family members. Children's hair was washed and combed as part of weekly routines, though not daily, as water was too valuable to waste. Oils might be added sparingly to soften hair or add fragrance, though in poorer households these were plain rather than perfumed. Despite the lack of luxury, attention to hair was important, for it reflected neatness and discipline. Clothing also reflected hygiene practices. Most garments were made from linen or wool, simple tunics and cloaks that could be washed in basins or at streams. Washing clothes was a laborious task, involving soaking, scrubbing, and drying them in sunlight. Soap as we know it was rare, but ash and clay mixtures served as cleaning agents, rubbing away dirt from fabrics. Families often washed garments together, making it a communal activity, especially when done at riverbanks. Freshly laundered clothing, scented faintly by herbs or dried grass, was a sign of care, completing the cycle of bathing and grooming. The design of homes supported these practices in small but meaningful ways. Many houses included courtyards with drains or small paved areas where washing could take place. Basins carved from stone or shaped from clay stood ready to hold water for rinsing hands and faces. In wealthier households, small bathing rooms existed, with plastered walls and shallow tubs, but in villages most washing happened in multipurpose spaces. Cleanliness was woven into daily tasks, washing hands before meals, rinsing feet after returning from fields, or wiping dust from faces after travel along unpaved roads. These small acts were as important as full bathing, keeping dirt and discomfort at bay in a world where dust and sweat were constant companions. Children learned hygiene from their families. Mothers instructed daughters in how to braid hair neatly, how to wash clothing, and how to apply oil without wasting it. Boys learned the routines of bathing after play or work, often imitating older men in oiling and scraping. These practices became habits passed down through generations, reinforcing the values of order and self-care. Even in the humblest homes, families recognized the importance of keeping bodies and clothing clean, for it meant health, comfort, and respectability. Seasonal rhythms also shaped hygiene. In summer, washing was easier, as water was plentiful and warmth made bathing outdoors comfortable. In winter, families reduced bathing frequency, conserving fuel and water, but still maintained smaller routines of washing hands, faces, and hair. Festivals and gatherings often required extra effort, with families taking time to launder garments, apply oil, and present themselves in their best condition. Grooming was not only about comfort, but also about social standing, ensuring that individuals appeared properly before neighbors and guests. Archaeological finds from rural Greece reveal much about these habits. Excavated homes show basins set into walls, clay tubs, and drainage channels, even in modest dwellings. Strigils, though plain, appear in village sites, proving that oiling and scraping were not confined to the wealthy. Pottery shards reveal traces of oils mixed with herbs, while combs and grooming tools attest to the care taken with hair. These objects confirm what written accounts suggest. Hygiene was a universal concern, adapted to each family's means, but never neglected. The philosophy of balance extended into village life, just as it did in the cities. Cleanliness was not about excess or ornament, but about maintaining harmony between body and environment. Farmers who worked long hours in fields recognized the need to wash away sweat and dust, not only for comfort, but for health. Craftsmen who handled clay, metal, or would cleanse their hands and faces at the end of the day, restoring themselves before eating or sleeping. These practices, though modest, carried a sense of dignity, reinforcing the idea that caring for the body was as important as tending fields or maintaining homes. Even in villages, fragrance played a role in hygiene, though more simply. Bundles of herbs such as thyme or mint might be hung in homes, their scent freshening the air. Oil stored with sprigs of rosemary added fragrance when applied to skin or hair. Washing clothes in water mixed with herbs left them lightly scented. These touches, though small, made the routines of hygiene more pleasant, turning necessity into comfort. In the end, everyday hygiene in Greek homes and villages was about rhythm and resourcefulness. It was about fetching water, heating it over fires, pouring it into basins, rubbing oil onto skin, and scraping it away with simple tools. It was about combing hair in the evening light, scrubbing clothes at streams, and washing hands before meals. These were not acts of luxury, but of daily discipline, carried out by all, regardless of wealth. They shaped how people felt in their bodies, how they interacted with neighbors, and how they saw themselves as part of a community. Imagine it is to picture a family gathered in a courtyard, clay jars of water at their sides, children splashing in basins while parents rinsed dust from their faces. It is to hear the scrape of a comb through hair, the trickle of water over stone, the murmur of voices at the fountain house. These are the quiet sounds of hygiene in ancient Greece, modest yet enduring, reminders that even in the simplest villages, care for the body was a constant part of life. When we think of hygiene in ancient Greece, it is easy to picture bathing in courtyards, scraping oil with strigils, or applying fragrant perfumes. Yet another part of staying clean was just as important: clothing. Clothes were more than coverings for the body. They were daily companions that absorbed sweat, dust, and smoke from hearth fires. In a world where summers were hot, roads were unpaved, and households worked with their hands, garments required constant attention. Cleanliness was not only about washing the skin, but also about keeping fabric fresh, laundered, and comfortable to wear. In homes, villages, and towns, the art of laundering clothes became one of the quiet foundations of Greek hygiene. Greek clothing was simple in design, but deeply practical. The most common garment was the chiton, a tunic made of linen or wool. It was essentially a rectangle of fabric, pinned or sewn at the shoulders and belted at the waist. Over this, men might wear a himation, a heavier cloak draped around the body, while women often added longer overgarments or shawls. Children wore smaller versions of the same basic styles. Because these clothes were made of natural fibers, they were breathable but also prone to absorbing dirt, odors, and oils from the skin. Regular washing was necessary, not only for comfort but also for social respectability. Laundry was a labor-intensive process. Without soap in the modern sense, Greeks relied on ash, clay, and water to clean fabric. Ashes from hearth fires, when mixed with water, created a mild alkaline solution that helped break down oils and stains. Clay, abundant in the landscape, could also absorb grease and dirt when rubbed into fabric. These materials were not glamorous, but they were effective, and they formed the backbone of Greek laundry routines. Women, who carried most of the responsibility for household tasks, became skilled in using these simple substances to restore garments to freshness. Washing usually took place at communal spaces or natural water sources. Streams, rivers, and springs provided flowing water to rinse fabrics thoroughly. Families carried bundles of clothing to these sites, soaking garments in large basins or directly in the current. The sound of clothes being beaten against rocks or scrubbed by hand filled the air, mingling with conversation among neighbors who turned laundry into a social activity. For those living near towns, public wash areas offered similar opportunities, with basins carved into stone and channels carrying water for repeated rinsing. These spaces were alive with the rhythm of work and talk, where the business of cleanliness was carried out together at home. Smaller-scale laundering was common. Courtyards provided space to soak and scrub clothes in ceramic tubs. Families poured heated water into these basins, mixing in ash or clay to help loosen dirt. Garments were rubbed, wrung, and rinsed, then hung to dry on lines or laid across sun-warmed walls. The Greek sun was a powerful ally in this process, bleaching fabrics naturally and leaving them fresh with the scent of air and light. In winter, drying was slower, requiring more patience, but households adapted, finding ways to hang clothing indoors near hearths or in sheltered areas. The care of linen and wool required different approaches. Linen, favored for its coolness in summer, was lighter and easier to wash but could wrinkle and weaken over time. Wool, essential in colder months, absorbed odors more easily and demanded thorough rinsing to avoid heaviness. Wealthier households with access to more resources often rotated garments, ensuring that each had time to dry fully and maintain its quality. Poorer families, with fewer clothes, had to launder more frequently and wear garments until they were threadbare. In both cases, the cycle of washing, drying, and mending defined the life of every garment. Fragrance played a role in clothing care just as it did in personal grooming. Herbs such as lavender, thyme, or mint were sometimes placed in storage chests to keep clothes smelling pleasant. Oils used on the body also transferred to fabric, leaving garments lightly scented. Freshly laundered clothing, dried under the sun and touched by fragrant herbs, carried an aroma of cleanliness that complemented the bathing and grooming rituals of the body. The connection between skin and fabric was intimate, and Greeks understood that true freshness came from caring for both. Mending was another aspect of hygiene, for cleanliness was not only about washing but also about maintaining garments in good condition. A torn tunic, a fraying hem, or a cloak with holes from where did not simply look untidy. It also collected dirt more easily and wore down faster. Women and, in some cases, hired workers devoted time to repairing clothes with needle and thread, extending their usefulness. In wealthier households, this task might fall to servants or specialized textile workers, while in poorer families, it was part of everyday domestic life. Keeping clothes intact was as important as keeping them clean, ensuring that garments served their purpose for as long as possible. The relationship between clothing and hygiene also reflected social status. A well-kept chiton signaled not only cleanliness, but also discipline and respect for community standards. To appear in public with dirty or ragged clothing suggested neglect, poverty, or disregard for order. In this way, clothing became part of a person's identity, shaping how they were perceived by others. Even the simplest garments, if freshly washed and neatly worn, conveyed dignity. This social dimension of hygiene reinforced the importance of laundering as a household priority. Laundry was also seasonal. In summer, washing was easier, with abundant sunlight and warm air drying clothes quickly. Large-scale washing days could be organized, with whole households participating. In winter, however, laundering was more challenging. Water was colder, drying slower, and fuel for heating water more precious. Families adapted by spacing out major washes, focusing instead on smaller, more regular rinses of essential garments. Seasonal cycles thus shaped the rhythm of hygiene, binding it to the natural world as much as to human effort. Archaeological evidence offers glimpses into these practices. Basins and tubs discovered in domestic spaces show how homes accommodated washing. Storage chests for garments, often decorated, reveal the care taken in preserving clothing. Traces of ash and clay residues in household contexts suggest their use in cleaning. Figurines and pottery images depict women at work with fabric, bending over basins or wringing garments. These silent witnesses confirm what written sources hint at, that laundering was a central, constant part of Greek hygiene, woven into the daily labor of families that lie in villages and small towns. The communal nature of laundry created bonds among neighbors. Washing together was not only efficient but also social. Women exchanged news, shared advice, and built networks of support while working side by side. Children played nearby, splashing in water or helping with small tasks. The act of laundering thus became part of community life, a shared effort that reinforced ties of friendship and cooperation. Clean clothing emerged not only from individual labor but from collective rhythms, reflecting the interconnectedness of Greek society. For the Greeks, cleanliness of clothing was inseparable from the idea of balance and order. A body freshly bathed but dressed in soiled garments was incomplete, just as clean clothes worn on an unwashed body rang false. True hygiene required harmony between skin and fabric, between personal care and household labor. This harmony reflected broader Greek values of moderation, discipline, and respect for both self and community. In this way, laundry was not merely a chore. It was an art of freshness, a quiet but powerful element of daily life that to imagine it is to picture women gathered at a stream, garments spread across rocks, their hands busy with cloth while voices rise in steady conversation. It is to see a courtyard where linen tunics sway in the breeze, drying under a bright sun. It is to step into a home where the scent of herbs lingers in a wooden chest filled with neatly folded clothes. These are the unseen details of Greek hygiene, modest, repetitive, and essential, shaping not only how people looked but how they lived. In the warm, sunlit world of ancient Greece, water was both the simplest and the most essential element of daily hygiene. It was not taken for granted, as it flowed neither endlessly nor effortlessly. Unlike in the modern world, where clean water runs with the turn of a handle, every drop in Greece had to be carried, drawn, and carefully managed. The daily pursuit of cleanliness was bound to the rhythms of water, its sources, its storage, and its use. To understand how Greeks stayed fresh and maintained hygiene is to understand their relationship with wells, fountains, and the effort of fetching and handling water. Villages and towns across Greece were built with water in mind. Settlements often grew near natural springs or rivers, places where the flow of water could sustain crops, animals, and people. In more urban centers, fountains and wells became the lifelines of entire neighborhoods. Carved from stone, decorated with simple columns or reliefs, these fountain houses were not merely functional. They were gathering points where people met daily. Women and children walked with clay jars balanced on heads or cradled in arms, queuing in the early morning or evening to fill their vessels. The creak of rope pulling buckets from wells, the splash of water into amphorae, and the murmur of conversation created the soundtrack of daily life. The journey of water from its source to the household was as important as the water itself. Amphorae and pithoi, large storage jars, stood in courtyards and kitchens, holding the day's supply. These jars were not light. A single amphora could weigh over 30 kilograms when full, making the act of carrying water an exercise in strength and balance. Smaller hydriae, three-handled jugs, were designed for easier transport. Their elegant shapes depicted often in Greek art. Scenes painted on pottery show women at fountains, hydriae on shoulders, capturing this universal moment of fetching water. It was not only necessity, it was routine, one of the repeating tasks that structured daily life. Once in the household, water was portioned carefully. A basin might be filled for washing hands and face before meals. Another jug might be warmed over a fire for bathing in a courtyard tub. Children splashed in smaller basins, their laughter mingling with the sound of pouring water. At night, feet dusty from unpaved roads were rinsed before lying down to sleep. In each act, the effort that had gone into carrying the water gave weight to its use. There was little waste. Every drop mattered. Hygiene practices centered on these small but constant applications of water. Full-body bathing did not happen daily for most Greeks. Water was too valuable for such luxury. Instead, regular washing of hands, faces, and feet formed the backbone of cleanliness. After a day in fields, shops, or workshops, rinsing off the grime of labor was as refreshing as it was necessary. The coolness of water on skin after hours under the Mediterranean sun provided immediate relief, a small act that restored both body and spirit. In towns, the availability of public baths added another layer to hygiene, but even these relied on wells and aqueducts to supply their pools. Engineers channeled water from springs into stone basins, creating spaces where more thorough cleansing was possible. Yet in villages and homes, the modest basin or clay tub was the everyday reality. Families knew the limits of their supply and learned to make it stretch. Rinsing could be done with just a jug poured slowly, each trickle measured and valued. The importance of water extended to clothing and household items as well. Laundry required larger quantities, and families often scheduled washing days around the availability of water. At communal streams or wash areas, garments were soaked, scrubbed, and beaten against rocks to release dirt. The sound of fabric snapping under skilled hands was part of the rhythm of Greek hygiene, carried out with patience and shared labor. These tasks, like bathing, reinforced the idea that water was not passive but active. It demanded work to fetch, to heat, to carry, and to use well. Archaeological traces show how central water was to Greek daily life. Remains of wells, sometimes lined with stone, appear in village excavations. Fountain houses, with carved basins and steps worn smooth from centuries of feet, testify to their constant use. Clay hydri with painted scenes of water carrying remind us that this act was not occasional but daily, repeated countless times by countless hands. Inscriptions sometimes even recorded rules about water use, reminders that managing it wisely was a shared concern. The pursuit of cleanliness through water was also shaped by the climate. Summers were dry, making wells and springs more precious, while winters brought rains that filled cisterns and refreshed reservoirs. Families adjusted their routines accordingly, bathing more often when water was abundant, conserving more carefully when supplies ran low. This seasonal rhythm tied hygiene directly to nature's cycles, making water not only a daily concern, but also a yearly one. Even the simple act of drinking connected to hygiene. Greeks understood that fresh, clear water from springs was better than stagnant sources. They preferred running streams to still ponds, and many settlements prized access to pure springs. Contaminated water could spread illness, so the care taken in sourcing and storing it was as much about health as about taste. In this way, the link between water and hygiene was total, encompassing the body, clothing, household, and diet. The quiet rituals of water use shaped the experience of cleanliness in every Greek household. Morning might begin with a splash of cool water on the face, poured from a jug into a shallow basin. Midday labor in fields or workshops ended with rinsing dust from arms and feet. Evening brought another round of washing, before meals or rest. Each act was small, but together they created a rhythm of freshness, repeating day after day. It was not extravagance, but consistency that kept Greeks feeling clean, refreshed, and comfortable. To imagine this world is to see a courtyard at dawn. A woman lifting a hydria onto her shoulder, her children following with smaller jugs. It is to hear the splash of water poured into a basin, the laughter of children washing their feet, the low hum of neighbors meeting at the fountain house. It is to picture the gleam of sunlight on a clay amphora, filled to the brim, carried carefully home for the day's use. These are the scenes of the daily quest for cleanliness, where water was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in its repetition, extraordinary in its importance. In the end, hygiene in ancient Greece was inseparable from water. Without wells, springs, and fountains, no amount of oil, strigils, or perfumes could sustain cleanliness. It was the foundation upon which all other practices rested, the invisible element that tied together health, comfort, and community. The quest for water was the quest for freshness, carried out in small acts that defined the rhythm of Greek life. When we imagine the world of ancient Greece, it is easy to think of marble temples, busy marketplaces, and calm seas glistening under the sun. Yet daily life was also filled with subtler details, and among the most important of these was scent. The air itself carried layers of fragrance. The smell of herbs hung in kitchens, the salty tang of the sea drifting into coastal towns, the sweetness of olive oil warmed by the sun, and the faint traces of perfumes worn on the skin. For the Greeks, fragrance was not a luxury alone, but an inseparable part of hygiene, freshness, and comfort. It shaped how people felt in their homes, how they presented themselves in public, and how they experienced the world around them. The first and most natural element of Greek fragrance was the air itself. Homes were designed to make use of breezes, with courtyards open to the sky and windows facing outward. Fresh air circulated through rooms, carrying away smoke from hearths and cooling the spaces where families lived. Unlike tightly enclosed houses of later centuries, Greek dwellings embraced openness, ensuring that air was part of daily cleanliness. Morning routines often included opening shutters, letting in light and air together, and allowing the scent of night to drift away. Villages near the sea smelled of salt and seaweed, while inland towns carried the fragrance of fields, pine trees, and warm earth. These scents, though natural, set the stage for daily life, grounding people in their environment and reminding them of the freshness of the world beyond their homes. Within this natural framework, the Greeks added their own layers of fragrance through herbs and oils. Olive oil was central, as it was rubbed onto the body for cleansing and grooming, but plain oil could be heavy or bland. To make it more pleasant, families infused it with herbs, flowers, and resins. Lavender, thyme, rosemary, and sage grew abundantly in Greek soil and found their way into oils. Rose petals, gathered in spring, created sweet perfumes when pressed and mixed into liquid. For those who had access to trade, exotic scents such as cinnamon, cassia, and myrrh enriched local fragrances, offering rarer notes that stood out in gatherings. These scents did not only mask odors. They symbolized care for the body, turning routine grooming into a sensory ritual. The vessels used to hold perfumes were as important as the liquids inside them. Small alabastrons and Arab alloy, carved from stone or molded from clay, were designed to store precious oils. Their narrow openings allowed only a few drops at a time, preventing waste. Often painted or decorated, they reflected the artistry of Greek pottery, blending beauty with function. Carrying such vessels was a mark of refinement, but even modest families owned simpler versions, keeping a small reserve of fragrant oil for special occasions. A single drop of scented oil applied to hair or rubbed on the neck could change how a person felt and how they were perceived. Hair carried fragrance particularly well, and Greeks paid attention to this. After combing and applying oil, hair retained not only sheen, but also the scent of the herbs infused in the liquid. Women sometimes added ribbons or bands that had been soaked in fragrant oils, so that the aroma lingered throughout the day. Clothing, too, absorbed fragrance. Linen tunics dried in the sun carried the scent of fresh air, but families often enhanced this by storing garments with sprigs of herbs or small sachets of dried flowers. Opening a chest to retrieve clothing released a faint aroma of thyme or lavender. a quiet touch of freshness that connected personal hygiene with the broader care of the household. The social role of fragrance was undeniable. When Greeks gathered at symposia, in marketplaces, or at festivals, scent became part of presence. To appear freshly bathed, oiled, and lightly perfumed was to signal attentiveness and respect for others. Overpowering fragrance was frowned upon, for moderation was the ideal. The right balance, enough to be noticed but not enough to dominate, demonstrated refinement. In this way, fragrance became a subtle language, communicating cleanliness, discipline, and social awareness. Even in modest homes, fragrance shaped daily life. Bundles of herbs hung from rafters, drying for later use. Kitchens, where olive oil and bread were staples, carried their own natural aromas, blending food with household freshness. Hearth smoke mixed with these scents, and while it could cling to clothes, families countered it with oils, herbs, and fresh air. In this balance of natural and crafted aromas, Greek homes found their rhythm of cleanliness and comfort. The role of fragrance extended beyond the body and the home to public spaces. Gymnasiums and baths, where oiling and cleansing took place, were filled with the aroma of olive oil and herbs. Athletes rubbed themselves with perfumed oil before exercise, and after scraping it off with strigils, they reapplied it lightly. The result was a communal scent, familiar and recognizable, a blend of sweat, oil, and fragrance that defined these spaces. Marketplaces, too, were saturated with scents. Fresh fish, olives, herbs, and flowers mingled in the air, reminding visitors of the intimate connection between daily life, food, and hygiene. Archaeological finds give us evidence of this fragrant culture. Fragments of alabastrons have been uncovered in graves and homes alike, some still carrying traces of oil absorbed into the clay. Inscriptions describe the value of perfumes and their role in trade, while pottery images show figures holding small flasks or applying oil to their bodies. These reminders confirm that fragrance was not an occasional indulgence, but a constant, woven into the texture of Greek life. The psychological effect of fragrance also mattered. Greeks believed that pleasant scents refreshed the spirit and restored energy. A home filled with the aroma of herbs was considered inviting. A person who smelled of fresh oil was more approachable, and clothing scented with natural freshness was a source of pride. In daily life, these small details lifted the mood, creating comfort even in simple households. The discipline of maintaining fragrance was thus more than hygiene. It was a way of shaping the experience of life itself. To picture the world of ancient Greece through its scents is to imagine a morning courtyard where freshly drawn water cools clay basins. Sprigs of rosemary hang drying by the hearth, and a woman rubs oil scented with thyme into her hair. It is to walk through a marketplace where the sharp smell of fish mixes with the sweetness of figs and the freshness of mint. It is to sit in a gymnasium where the air is alive with the mingled fragrance of oils, sweat, and open air. These are not grand images of marble and heroes, but quiet realities of fragrance, fresh air, and daily cleanliness. Ultimately, the Greeks understood that hygiene was not only about removing dirt, but about adding freshness. It was about shaping the air they breathed, the scents they carried, and the atmosphere they created around themselves. Fragrance, in oils, herbs, and simple fresh air, completed the cycle of hygiene. It gave depth to the feeling of being clean, turning practical routines into experiences of comfort and renewal. It was one of the silent, enduring arts of daily life, carried out with the same care as bathing, grooming, and laundering. In the homes of ancient Greece, cleanliness was not an abstract idea, but a physical reality shaped by the tools and objects families used every single day. While we often focus on the rituals of bathing, oiling, or grooming, the story of hygiene also lives in the basins, strigils, jars, and combs that made these routines possible. Each of these items, whether humble or finely decorated, was part of the material culture of cleanliness, tangible artifacts that turned the desire for freshness into daily practice. They remind us that hygiene was not just a matter of intention, but of tools crafted, carried, and used over and over again across generations. The basin, or laterian, stood at the heart of household hygiene. Made from clay, stone, or bronze, these shallow vessels held water for washing hands, faces, or feet. Some were simple, plain clay bowls used in modest homes. Others were elaborately carved or decorated, placed in courtyards or near entrances as a sign of household care. In many families, a guest arriving from dusty roads was greeted not only with words, but with water poured into a basin, their hands rinsed and dried with a cloth. The basin, therefore, was both practical and symbolic. It represented welcome, order, and the refreshing touch of cleanliness that marked the threshold between outside and inside. Storage vessels formed another essential part of this material culture. Large pit hoy, heavy jars often set into the ground, stored reserves of water drawn from wells or fountains. Amphorae, with their narrow necks and pointed bases, transported water over distances, carried home on shoulders or carts. Smaller hydriae, with 3 handles, were designed for easier lifting and pouring. Their shapes were not accidental. They reflected centuries of refinement in balancing weight, volume, and utility. The very act of handling these vessels required strength and skill, as a full hydria could weigh more than 20 kilograms. Painted scenes on pottery frequently depict women at fountains holding hydriae, capturing the universality of this daily task. These vessels made possible the cycle of washing and bathing, bringing water into homes where it was portioned out into basins for use. The strigil, a small curved tool of bronze or iron, was equally vital. Used to scrape oil, sweat, and dust from the skin, it was as much a symbol of Greek hygiene as the basin. Athletes carried them into gymnasiums, while families kept them in homes for daily grooming. Some strigils were plain, with simple curves designed only for function. Others bore delicate engravings or handles shaped into decorative forms, objects of pride as well as utility. The sound of a strigil drawn across the arm or back was familiar to every Greek household, part of the rhythm of cleansing that followed exercise, work, or heat. Archaeological discoveries of strigils in both urban and rural sites confirm their ubiquity, testifying to their role in the lived experience of hygiene. Combs and grooming tools added another layer to this material culture. Made from bone, ivory, or wood, combs were essential for detangling hair, distributing oil, and maintaining neatness. Their teeth varied in width, some designed for fine grooming, others for thicker hair. Found in graves, homes, and even marketplaces, combs speak to the universality of hair care as part of cleanliness. Alongside combs, small razors and scissors existed, though used sparingly, as shaving was not always fashionable. Tweezers, too, have been uncovered in archaeological sites, suggesting attention to details of appearance, even in modest households. Together, these tools reveal how the Greeks linked hygiene not only to washing, but also to maintaining order in every aspect of the body, towels and cloths. Though rarely surviving in the archaeological record, must also have been constant companions in Greek hygiene. Made of linen or wool, they served to dry skin after rinsing, to wipe away oil, or to wrap hair after bathing. Descriptions from later sources hint at their use, and their absence from physical evidence is explained by the perishability of fabric. Yet their importance cannot be overstated. No cleansing ritual was complete without drying, and the texture of fresh linen against skin offered comfort as well as function. Perfume containers, or alabastrons, deserve mention as well. These slim, elegant vessels stored scented oils, their narrow necks designed to release only a few drops at a time. Crafted from clay, glass or alabaster. They were as beautiful as they were practical. Some were painted with scenes of daily life, while others were left plain, their smooth surfaces pleasing to hold. The alabastron, often found in both domestic and burial contexts, symbolized the importance of fragrance in completing the cycle of hygiene. A drop of oil from such a vessel transformed the experience of grooming, adding not only cleanliness but also freshness and identity. Even the spaces where these tools were stored tell us about their place in Greek life. Small chests, shelves, or niches in walls held grooming sets, with strigils, combs, and oil flasks placed side by side. Families took care in arranging these items, for they were used daily and represented the household's commitment to order. In wealthier homes, these objects might be displayed with pride, their decoration signaling refinement. In humbler homes, they were plainer but no less important, part of the shared rhythm of cleanliness that united all Greeks. The archaeological record supports this picture of a material culture devoted to hygiene. Excavations of homes have uncovered basins with wear marks from constant use, hydri with traces of water deposits inside, and strigils worn smooth by repeated scraping. These silent objects speak across centuries, reminding us that cleanliness was not abstract but tangible, carried out with tools that shaped the experience of the body every day. Museums today preserve these artifacts, their presence a direct link to the countless hands that once held them in daily routines of care. The social significance of these tools was also profound. A strigil, though practical, was also a mark of participation in Greek culture. To own one was to belong to a world that valued exercise, grooming, and moderation. A well-crafted hydria signaled not only functionality, but also a family's ability to invest in durable, even beautiful, vessels. A finely made alabastron might serve as a gift, connecting hygiene with social bonds. Thus, the objects of cleanliness carried meanings beyond their immediate use, shaping identity and community. To picture a Greek household through its tools is to imagine a courtyard where a large basin sits in sunlight, filled with cool water. A child fetches a comb from a wooden chest, while a mother pours oil from an alabastron into her hand. A father returns from work, scraping dust from his arms with a strigil before rinsing in the basin. Towels hang drying nearby, ready for reuse. Hydri stand against a wall, filled from the fountain house earlier in the day, their clay surfaces darkened by dampness. These are the quiet details of cleanliness, lived not in grand gestures, but in repeated acts supported by simple, enduring tools that in the end. The material culture of hygiene in ancient Greece reveals the balance between necessity and care, between utility and beauty. The basin, the strigil, the hydria, the comb, each served a purpose. Each made the pursuit of cleanliness possible. Together, they formed a world where hygiene was not only about ideals, but about practice, carried out with objects that have survived to tell their story. They remind us that the Greeks lived their cleanliness not only through rituals and habits, but through the tools that gave those habits shape. Daily hygiene in ancient Greece did not exist in isolation from nature. It was deeply connected to the seasons, to the dry winds of summer and the rains of winter, to the shifting cycles of warmth and cold. In a land of mountains, coastlines, and olive groves, where summers could be scorching and winters damp and chilly, cleanliness had to adapt constantly. The routines of bathing, laundering, and grooming followed not only personal habits, but also the rhythm of the year itself. To explore Greek hygiene is to step into this seasonal dance, where dust and heat shaped one kind of freshness, and rain and cold shaped another. Summer in Greece brought with it blazing sunshine and endless dust. Roads were unpaved, fields were dry, and every breeze carried fine grains of earth that settled on skin, hair, and clothing. The need for washing increased, not because water was abundant, but because bodies grew uncomfortable under the constant film of dust. Families adjusted by rinsing more frequently, often in simple ways, splashing hands and faces with cool water several times a day, rinsing feet before entering homes, and pouring water from jugs over arms to remove sweat and dirt. Full baths remained occasional, for water had to be fetched and stored carefully, but the smaller acts of cleanliness grew more frequent. The sound of splashing basins and dripping jugs became part of the daily soundtrack of summer life. Olive oil and strigils became especially important in the summer months. After long hours of labor or exercise, rubbing oil onto the body and scraping it away removed layers of dust that clung tightly to the skin. The sheen of oil also provided some protection against the relentless sun, preventing dryness and irritation. Scented oils infused with herbs like thyme or lavender offered not only relief, but also a pleasant aroma that countered the odors of sweat. Athletes in gymnasiums were particularly reliant on these routines, their bodies covered in oil before training and cleansed with strigils afterward. In the heat of summer, oiling and scraping became acts of both comfort and necessity. Summer also shaped clothing and laundry. Light linen chitons replaced heavier wool garments, allowing air to circulate more freely. These clothes, however, absorbed sweat quickly and needed regular washing. Families often scheduled laundry days around streams or communal washing areas, turning them into social occasions. Clothing was scrubbed, rinsed, and then spread on sun-warmed rocks or lines, drying quickly under the blazing sky. The smell of sun-dried linen carried a freshness that no oil or perfume could match, a scent tied directly to summer itself. Herbs hung in homes added further fragrance, ensuring that garments carried the impression of both earth and air. Water, however, was more scarce in summer, and this scarcity shaped every choice. Wells and cisterns ran lower, and families rationed water carefully, reserving it for drinking and essential washing. Bathing outdoors in courtyards or near streams was common, making the most of whatever resources were available. Children often played in shallow basins, splashing themselves with cool water to relieve the heat, their laughter mingling with the hum of cicadas. In this way, summer cleanliness was both constrained and creative, built on small rituals of refreshment that countered the dryness of the season. Winter presented a very different set of challenges. The rains returned, filling cisterns and refreshing wells, but the air grew damp and temperatures dropped enough to make bathing uncomfortable. Heating water over hearths became necessary for any kind of full washing. Families warmed bronze cauldrons or clay pots, then poured the heated water into basins or tubs in sheltered courtyards. Bathing moved indoors or into partially enclosed spaces where the warmth of fire and the protection of walls made the experience bearable. Though water was more abundant, the cold discouraged frequent full-body bathing, and people relied instead on smaller acts of cleanliness, rinsing hands, washing faces, and warming cloths to wipe down bodies. Clothing, too, shifted with the seasons. Wool replaced linen, wrapping the body in heavier, warmer layers. These garments absorbed more odors and took longer to dry after washing. Families washed them less frequently in winter, not out of neglect, but out of necessity, focusing instead on brushing and airing clothes to keep them fresh between launderings. Hanging garments near hearths helped dry them, though smoke sometimes left a faint scent that had to be countered with herbs or oils. The rhythm of laundry slowed, but the expectation of neatness and cleanliness remained, adapted to the season's limitations. Winter also brought the comfort of oils used for both cleansing and warmth. Olive oil, gently warmed, was rubbed into skin to soften dryness caused by cold winds and damp air. The scraping away of oil was less about removing dust and more about renewing the skin, keeping it supple in harsher conditions. Fragrant herbs mixed into these oils lifted spirits during the darker months, offering psychological refreshment as much as physical care. In households, The smell of rosemary or sage-infused oils filled the air, reminding families of green life even in the gray of winter. The seasonal rhythms extended into public life as well. In summer, gymnasiums and baths were full of activity, men exercising and cleansing in the open air, their routines sustained by the warmth of the season. In winter, these spaces grew quieter, though indoor facilities continued to operate where available. Conversations at fountains shifted with the seasons. In summer, neighbors complained of heat and dust while waiting in line to draw water. In winter, they discussed the cold, the rains, and the challenge of drying laundry. These shared experiences bound communities together, reminding them that hygiene was never simply individual, but always communal. Shaped by nature's cycles, archaeological evidence reveals the traces of these seasonal habits. Cisterns lined with plaster show how families collected rainwater in winter. Basins with wear marks indicate frequent use for rinsing, suggesting daily washing even when full bathing was less common. Strigils found in gymnasiums confirm their importance in hot months, when athletes relied on them constantly. Textiles discovered in rare conditions show the difference between light linen and heavy wool, linking clothing directly to seasonal adaptation. These material remains bring the rhythms of cleanliness into focus. Even across centuries, to imagine the seasonal life of Greek hygiene is to picture two contrasting scenes. In summer, a family stands in a courtyard, pouring water from a hydria into a basin, rinsing dust from faces while linen garments sway in the hot breeze. The smell of lavender oil lingers in the air, mingling with the sharp dryness of earth. Children splash in shallow tubs, their laughter carried on cicada song. In winter, another family gathers near a hearth, pouring warm water into a clay tub, steam rising gently as they wash. Wool cloaks hang nearby, heavy and drying slowly, their fibers carrying the scent of smoke. Outside, rain patters on rooftops, filling cisterns that will sustain the household through the year. In the end, the seasonal rhythms of ancient Greece remind us that hygiene was not static but dynamic. It changed with the dust of summer and the rains of winter, with the needs of the body and the availability of water. Cleanliness was not only about habits, but about adaptation, a constant negotiation between nature and human care. This adaptability was the true strength of Greek hygiene, allowing people to remain fresh, comfortable, and dignified no matter the season. As we leave the world of ancient Greece behind, the images that linger are not only of temples, statues, or grand theaters, but of quieter scenes, the steady trickle of water from a fountain, the curve of a strigil drawn across sun-warmed skin, the scent of herbs drifting through a courtyard, the sound of garments drying in the breeze. These small details shape daily life just as much as great achievements. They were the rhythms of freshness, the ways ordinary people cared for themselves and for one another in a land of heat, dust, and changing seasons. What stands out most is the balance. Hygiene for the Greeks was not about extravagance. It was about harmony with water, with air, with the body, and with the cycles of nature. They found dignity in cleanliness, comfort in fragrance, and identity in the tools and routines that surrounded them. Every basin, every comb, every amphora filled with water was part of a larger picture. A culture that believed order and care in the smallest acts were as meaningful as beauty in marble or poetry in verse. And in many ways, their habits still echo today. The value of fresh air, the ritual of washing hands, the desire to keep both body and clothing clean, the pleasure of a faint fragrance that lifts the spirit. These are not foreign to us. They are part of our lives, inherited not directly, but through centuries of continuity. Ancient practices may feel distant, yet they remind us that the pursuit of freshness and comfort is timeless as tonight. As this story draws to a close, imagine yourself walking through a Greek village at dusk. The sun has dipped low, casting long shadows across courtyards. Families gather to rinse away the dust of the day. Water jars stand filled for tomorrow. Garments sway gently in the evening breeze, and the soft scent of herbs lingers in the air. Life is simple, ordered, and calm. Thank you for joining this journey into the forgotten world of hygiene in ancient Greece. If you enjoyed this quiet exploration, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these calming histories alive, bringing more stories of the past to your evenings. Now rest easy. Let the rhythm of history settle gently in your mind and drift into sleep with the echoes of fresh air, flowing water, and the timeless care of daily life.